Elon Musk ordered a royal guard. "Smile for my tweet," he said. But the guard's response, what he did next, wasn't just protocol breaking. It was a silent message to the richest man in the world. You may be the CEO of Earth, but not here. And what happened next? To find out, first, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. You know that particular kind of London morning where the air's so crisp it makes your cheeks tingle and the sunlight hits Buckingham Palace at just the right angle to make the whole place look like something out of a fairy tale? That's exactly what it was like when the convoy of sleek black Range Rovers came gliding through those massive iron gates. The vehicles had that unmistakable look of important people doing important things. Tinted windows dark enough to hide state secrets, chrome bumpers that probably cost more than most people's cars, and that subtle hum of engines that whisper, "We own the road." Along the barriers, tourists were already craning their necks, phones rising like a synchronized salute, everyone hoping to catch a glimpse of whoever was significant enough to roll up to the Queen's house like they had a standing invitation. Then the door opens, and out steps Elon Musk. Now, love him or hate him, you can't argue the man doesn't have presence. At 52, he carries himself with that particular brand of Silicon Valley confidence, the kind that comes from literally shooting cars into space and then casually tweeting about it over breakfast. Navy suit, perfectly tailored, no tie, because ties are apparently for people who don't revolutionize entire industries before lunch. And he's scanning the forecourt with those calculating eyes, like he's mentally redesigning the whole palace layout for better foot traffic flow. "Fascinating setup," he says to the British minister walking beside him, gesturing toward the ceremonial guards with the casual interest of someone examining a particularly interesting piece of machinery. Very analog. When was the last update to this operating system? The minister, a diplomatic veteran who's probably dealt with more challenging international guests than he cares to remember, manages a polite chuckle. "Some traditions, Mr. Musk, run on legacy code that still works perfectly." Near the rope barriers, a kid with sticky fingers from a half-eaten ice cream cone tugs on his dad's jacket. "Is that the Rocket Man, Dad?" His father squints through his phone camera. "I think so, mate. The one who bought Twitter." But across that expansive stone courtyard, the kind that echoes every footstep like a drumbeat in a cathedral, stands Lance Sergeant Ewan McAllister, 39 years old, absolutely motionless at his ceremonial post by the South Arch. And I mean motionless in a way that makes statues look fidgety. His scarlet tunic is pressed so perfectly it could cut glass. His bearskin hat sits at regulation angle, and his eyes are locked on that distant point, somewhere beyond the crowd, beyond the cameras, beyond the richest man on the planet who's now pointing directly at him. Here's what Musk doesn't know about this particular analog system. McAllister isn't some tourist attraction in a costume. This man did 2 tours in Afghanistan with the Coldstream Guards. We're talking convoy protection through IED-infested highways, perimeter security when the mortars were falling, the kind of deployment where keeping your cool literally means coming home alive or not at all. He'd been mentioned in dispatches for maintaining defensive positions during a sustained attack on Forward Operating Base Edinburgh. And we're not talking about a brief fireworks display here. This was 4 hours of incoming rounds, and McAllister refused to abandon his post until every single wounded soldier was evacuated. His citation read, "Exceptional composure under extreme duress." The kind of composure that gets forged in places where silence means survival and discipline is the difference between life and death. So when Musk's gaze lands on him across that courtyard, he's not looking at some theatrical decoration. He's looking at a combat veteran who's forgotten more about real pressure than most people will ever experience. "That one," Musk says, pointing toward McAllister, with the casual gesture you'd use to select an item from a menu. "Let's see if British efficiency extends to social media engagement." His aide, a sharp-suited woman who probably spends half her time preventing her boss from breaking the internet and the other half cleaning up after he does, looks up from her tablet with barely concealed alarm. "Sir, this isn't part of the scheduled photo opportunity." But Musk's already moving, stepping off the designated visitor pathway with that signature confidence that suggests he's never met a boundary he couldn't simply ignore through sheer force of will. Behind the rope barriers, you can actually see the tourists' phones rising in perfect unison, like some choreographed digital ballet. Because everyone can sense it. Something's about to happen, and nobody wants to miss capturing the moment when two worlds collide. A palace security officer instinctively moves to intercept, then hesitates. I mean, what are you supposed to do? Physically restrain one of the most powerful men in the world in front of 50 cameras? That's a career-ending decision right there. "Mr. Musk, if we could keep to the approved areas," calls one of the British liaison officers, her voice carrying that particular tone of someone trying to remain helpful while internally calculating how many apology calls this is going to require. Musk doesn't even glance back, just saying hello to the talent. His security detail shadows him, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. Behind them, his aide is already mouthing silent apologies to an increasingly flustered palace official. And those phones, they're all recording now, because everyone in that crowd can sense that whatever's about to happen, it's going to be the kind of thing you tell stories about for years. Musk approaches Lance Sergeant McAllister with the casual confidence of a man who's spent his entire adult life expecting the world to rearrange itself around his presence. He stops just close enough to make it personal, just far enough to maintain plausible deniability, and tilts his head like he's studying a particularly interesting prototype. "Now that," he announces, his voice carrying clearly across the forecourt for the benefit of the growing audience, "is some serious brand commitment. The attention to detail is incredible. Who designed the costume? Disney?" A few nervous chuckles ripple through his entourage, the kind of laughter that says, "I have to laugh because he signs my paychecks, but this is getting uncomfortable fast." McAllister doesn't blink. Not even a flutter of an eyelash. Musk smirks, taking another half step forward. Moving into that space every tourist knows you're not supposed to enter. You know, in Silicon Valley, we call this kind of user engagement sticky. Very analog, but effective. "How long have you been running this particular program?" He actually strikes a mock-serious pose, mimicking the guard's rigid posture with exaggerated precision that would be funny if it weren't so completely inappropriate. "Come on," Musk continues, pulling out his phone with a flourish. "One smile for the algorithm. I've got 40 million followers who'd love to see proof that British efficiency includes a sense of humour. That's incredible market reach. Think of it as global brand ambassadorship." The crowd freezes. You can actually feel the shift. That moment when casual curiosity transforms into something much less comfortable. Phones are still recording, but the expressions behind them have changed from amusement to something closer to concern. McAllister's face reveals absolutely nothing. Not irritation, not confusion, not defiance. It's like looking at a perfectly composed mask of professional discipline. If he's registered Musk's presence at all, there's no external sign of it. A family near the Eastern Barrier, mum, dad and their little girl who's clutching a miniature Union Jack, lower their phones slightly. The girl tugs on her mother's coat with that insistent urgency only children possess. "Mummy, is that man allowed to talk to the soldier like that?" Her mother doesn't answer immediately. When she does, her voice carries that careful tone parents use when they're trying to explain something complicated without making it worse. "Some people, sweetheart, think the rules don't apply to them." McAllister remains perfectly still, rifle held at precisely the correct angle, eyes locked on that distant point that guards are trained to focus on. It's not that he's ignoring Musk. It's that maintaining his post requires a level of concentration that transcends whatever circus is happening in his immediate vicinity. Musk turns slightly toward the crowd, spreading his arms in that trademark "can you believe this" gesture. What, nothing? Is he powered down? Does someone need to reboot the system? An elderly gentleman with a Yorkshire accent calls out helpfully, "He's not going to move, mate. That's rather the whole point, isn't it?" Musk glances back at McAllister, and for the first time you can see genuine curiosity starting to creep around the edges of his practiced showmanship. The smirk wavers just slightly. Seriously, you're just going to stand there? I'm offering you global reach, viral potential. This could be your 15 minutes. His voice drops to something more personal, more direct. One smile, that's all I'm asking. Show the world you're human under all that pageantry. Nothing, not a blink, not the slightest shift in posture. And suddenly, what started as a performance has become something else entirely. The crowd has gone quiet, really quiet. Some people are turning their phones off completely. The nervous laughter has died completely. McAllister hasn't moved a muscle, hasn't said a word, hasn't even acknowledged that anything unusual is happening. And yet, somehow, in that perfect stillness, he has just reminded everyone present, without uttering a single syllable, that there are still some things in this world that money can't buy, algorithms can't crack, and influence can't touch. The tension in that forecourt has become so thick you could probably slice it with a ceremonial sword. Musk is still standing there, maybe 4 feet from Lance Sergeant McAllister, clearly expecting some kind of reaction. Any reaction, but he's getting absolutely nothing. This is impressive, Musk mutters, shaking his head with that grin that doesn't quite reach his eyes anymore. I've had CEOs break under less pressure, had entire companies restructure after a single tweet. This guy won't even acknowledge I exist. He starts pacing slightly, hands clasped behind his back, like he's a professor examining a particularly stubborn equation. How do you process information like this? Don't you get tired of being a human screensaver? McAllister maintains that perfect forward gaze, unmoved as granite. From somewhere in the crowd, you hear this quiet voice. An older woman, maybe in her 70s, wearing a faded military spouse pin on her coat lapel. She speaks just loud enough for the people around her to hear, but there's something in her tone that makes others lean in to listen. That boy's been to Helmand Province, she says, nodding subtly toward the motionless guard. Stood watch while his mates bled out, waiting for medevac. He's not performing for anyone. A schoolgirl, can't be more than 13, whispers to her friend, "Who's that weird guy bothering the soldier?" The friend squints through her phone screen. Some rich bloke who thinks he owns everything. You can see it rippling through the crowd now, that shift when people start to really understand what they're watching. The phones are still up, but nobody's smiling through their screens anymore. The atmosphere has changed from curious entertainment to something much more serious, much less comfortable. Musk's aide checks her smartwatch for the 4th time in as many minutes, her eyes constantly scanning the growing crowd of onlookers. They're not laughing anymore. And you can practically see her calculating how badly this could go sideways on social media. Look, I'm not trying to mock your traditions, Musk continues, his voice now carrying a sharper edge of genuine frustration. I actually respect dedication, but this is 2024. The world runs on engagement, connection. You're standing there like it's still 1824. Still nothing from McAllister. Or is this about ego? You think you're above basic human interaction. The silence stretches and stretches until it becomes its own kind of answer. A man near the back of the crowd, American accent, probably a tech worker judging by his company hoodie, shakes his head slowly. He's not trying to prove he's better. He's just not breaking character for anyone. Someone else murmurs, "This is painful to watch." And it is. Because what started as Musk trying to create a viral moment has become something else entirely. He's clearly growing more agitated, his voice losing that practiced, casual confidence and taking on the edge of someone who's genuinely confused by a system that won't respond to his input. "You're a soldier, right?" he demands, stepping even closer to the line he shouldn't cross. Soldiers follow orders. Take direction from leadership. I'm offering you direction here. The silence that follows isn't passive anymore. It's not empty. It's active resistance in its purest, quietest form, the kind that doesn't need raised voices or dramatic gestures. It just needs presence, composure, the absolute refusal to be moved by celebrity. A teenage boy whispers to his girlfriend, "Why doesn't he just walk away?" Because he's losing comes the quiet reply, and he knows it. For the first time in the entire exchange, Musk hesitates. His eyes flick toward the crowd, and what he sees there probably isn't what he was expecting. Their expressions have turned stone serious. Some look embarrassed for him. Some look annoyed at him. None look entertained anymore. He tries to recover, throwing up his hands in that exaggerated gesture of exasperation. Well, I guess customer service isn't part of the royal experience. Maybe I should leave a Yelp review. But the joke falls completely flat. No one laughs. No one even smiles. Because they all understand something Musk apparently doesn't. Lance Sergeant Ewan McAllister isn't being disrespectful. He's being disciplined. He's following protocol that's existed for centuries, protocol that doesn't bend for anyone, regardless of their net worth or their social media following or their expectation that the universe should rearrange itself around their presence. And the power of that discipline, of standing absolutely still when every camera, every provocation, and every attempt at manipulation is trying to pull you off course, is slowly filling the entire courtyard like rising tide. Musk is still talking, still gesturing, still trying to command the moment. No one's really listening anymore. They're watching McAllister, the man who hasn't moved, the man who won't be moved. And for maybe the first time in his entire public life, the man who usually controls every conversation has completely lost the room. The sound that cuts through the tension is unmistakable. The crisp rhythm of perfectly polished dress shoes against ancient flagstone. Everyone turns to see a distinguished man in an immaculate black overcoat emerging from the palace side entrance, moving with that particular kind of measured urgency that suggests someone in real authority has decided things have gone quite far enough. Senior Protocol Officer Charles Whitman, Royal Household. If you've ever wondered what quiet authority looks like, when it's been perfected over 30 years of managing international incidents, he's basically the gold standard. Tall, silver-haired, with the kind of presence that comes from decades of diplomatically but firmly reminding world leaders where the boundaries are. He approaches Musk with the practiced ease of someone who's dealt with difficult heads of state, tech moguls, and probably at least one actual dragon at some point in his career, offering a polite but unmistakably firm nod. "Mr. Musk," he says, his voice carrying that distinctly British quality of being perfectly courteous, while simultaneously brooking absolutely no argument whatsoever. "I'm Senior Protocol Officer Whitman. On behalf of Her Majesty's household, I must ask that you return to the designated viewing area." Musk flashes one of his trademark grins and gestures toward McAllister without actually looking at him. "Just admiring the craftsmanship here, Charles. Incredible attention to detail, very immersive experience. You should consider adding some interactive elements, maybe a selfie station." Whitman doesn't even blink. "Sir, the Coldstream Guards are not entertainers. They are serving members of His Majesty's Armed Forces conducting ceremonial duties. This area is an active military post, and your proximity violates established protocol." Established protocol? Musk's eyebrows rise like he's genuinely amused by the concept. "I've had dinner with presidents and kings, Charles. Discussed Mars colonization with NASA administrators. I think I can handle talking to a man in a fancy hat." Whitman meets his gaze directly, steady and clear as crystal. "And yet somehow, sir, none of them required a second reminder about appropriate boundaries." Boom, just like that. No raised voice, no dramatic gesture, just a surgical strike of British understatement that lands like a precision-guided missile. The crowd around them goes absolutely silent. You can actually hear someone's sharp intake of breath ripple through the onlookers. Musk tries to laugh it off, gesturing broadly toward the palace with both arms. "You know, I've always admired this place. Incredible architecture, amazing history. I even tweeted about it once, got 2 million likes. I told my followers, this is what happens when you invest in long-term infrastructure projects." Whitman's expression doesn't shift by even a millimeter. "This isn't infrastructure, Mr. Musk. It's heritage." That gets an actual murmur from the crowd, not with him, but decidedly at him. And you can see it register on his face. That moment when someone who's used to controlling every narrative realizes the story has turned against him. He pivots back toward McAllister, clearly still rankled by the guard's continued silence. All I wanted was one photo, one moment of human connection. You'd think I was asking him to compromise national security. You asked a British soldier to break formation on royal ground, Whitman says, his tone never shifting from that perfectly professional register, but with each word carrying the weight of centuries. In our tradition, Mr. Musk, service is to the crown, not to personalities. Musk's mouth opens, then closes. His aide steps closer, whispering something urgent near his shoulder. He waves her off with visible irritation. All right, Musk mutters, taking his first step backward since this entire encounter began. I didn't realize you all were so sensitive about your living museum exhibits. Whitman doesn't respond to the insult. His silence isn't wounded pride, it's protocol. Professional discipline that doesn't need to defend itself because it simply is. And behind him, Lance Sergeant McAllister still hasn't moved. Still hasn't acknowledged any of this. Still stands like he's been carved from the very foundation stones of the palace itself. The crowd has shifted again. A middle-aged teacher, you can tell from the way he's unconsciously herding the group of teenagers around him, leans down to one of his students. That guard just earned more respect standing still than most people get giving speeches, he murmurs. The teenager nods, eyes still fixed on McAllister. He hasn't said a single word. Musk casts one more glance around the forecourt, maybe trying to salvage something from this moment. But the audience has completely turned. The tourists aren't looking at him anymore. They're not hanging on his words or waiting for his next disruption. They're watching the guard. The man who didn't flinch. The man who wouldn't be moved. The man who's somehow won a confrontation without throwing a single punch or saying a single word. And the officer who didn't need to raise his voice to make his point absolutely clear. Somewhere in the crowd you hear a whispered, "He held his ground." Another voice follows, "Never even looked him in the eye." The moment no longer belongs to Musk. He stepped into a tradition that doesn't bend, doesn't break, and definitely doesn't perform on demand. And now he's standing in the middle of it, realizing that for all his innovation and influence and practiced disruption, some things simply cannot be optimized. You can feel it in the air, that electric tension of a confrontation that's reached its absolute breaking point. Musk is standing there, just beyond where Whitman intercepted him, still within clear view of Lance Sergeant McAllister. His entourage hovers behind him like nervous birds, not saying a word. Even his security team has that particular look of professionals who just want this moment to be over so they can all get back to the Tesla factory and pretend this never happened. But Musk, he's not finished. Not yet. He turns back toward the guard with one final attempt at reclaiming control of this situation. "You know something," he says, projecting his voice for the entire forecourt to hear. "I've revolutionized transportation, made electric vehicles mainstream. I'm literally building the infrastructure for humanity's future on Mars." There's a ripple through the crowd. Some heads turn. A few tourists instinctively look to Whitman, but he remains perfectly still, letting the moment play out. Musk steps closer again, not crossing the line this time, but standing right at the very edge of it, defiant and unyielding. That's real impact. That's actual change that matters. So show me some recognition, one nod, one smile. Acknowledge that progress exists. McAllister doesn't blink, doesn't twitch, doesn't acknowledge the demand any more than he has all the previous ones. And then, finally, he moves. It's not dramatic. It's not performative. It's not angry. It's just decisive. McAllister's grip on his rifle shifts just slightly, a subtle repositioning that any military observer would recognize as a closing gesture. Not breaking discipline, not abandoning his post, just a practiced adjustment that says this interaction is terminated. And then he speaks. One line, clear, unwavering, delivered without ever breaking that ceremonial forward stare. Progress that demands applause isn't progress, sir. It's performance. The words hit the forecourt like a thunderclap in perfect silence. You can literally hear the collective breath leave the crowd. It's not loud. It doesn't need to be loud. It's delivered with the same calm precision that McAllister has maintained throughout this entire ordeal. But it completely shatters every assumption Musk has made about this moment. Musk's mouth opens to respond, but no sound comes out. For the first time all afternoon, his expression changes, not into fury, not into offense, but into something else entirely, something that might almost be recognition, not admiration, not agreement, but the faint, grudging understanding that he has just run headlong into something bigger than himself, something that doesn't need his validation to exist. Behind the rope barrier, a young boy, maybe 10 years old, slowly raises his small hand to his forehead in an uncertain little salute. He doesn't fully understand what he's witnessed, but he's seen something in that guard that speaks to him, something worth honoring the only way he knows how. Then his sister does the same, then their father. Then the elderly woman with the military spouse, Pin, who spoke up earlier, then 2 American tourists who have been filming, quietly lowering their phones and straightening their backs. One by one, people along the rope line turn their bodies toward the guard, not to gawk, not to film, not to judge, but to acknowledge, to participate in something larger than celebrity and spectacle, to stand still, to offer their own silence back to the man who has wielded his with more power than any Twitter account ever could. McAllister doesn't look at them. His duty isn't to public opinion or crowd approval. But the tourists no longer need his attention. They've learned something from his example, and they're following his lead. And Musk, for the first time in perhaps decades, he says nothing. His hands, which have been gesturing and animated throughout this entire encounter, slowly drop to his sides. He looks around the forecourt, scanning the faces of the people watching, not for applause, not for approval, but trying to assess something he clearly hadn't expected. He's no longer the center of this moment. The man he tried to command has, through pure silence and unwavering discipline, taken the entire courtyard with him. Senior Protocol Officer Whitman takes a slow, measured breath and nods toward Musk's aide. She steps forward and whispers, "Mr. Musk, the minister is waiting inside for the scheduled meeting." This time, he doesn't argue. He doesn't protest. He doesn't demand one more chance to make his point. He simply turns and begins walking back toward the palace entrance, his entourage falling into step behind him. But here's the thing. As he walks away, the stillness doesn't break. No one boos, no one mocks, no one cheers, but no one follows either. He walks surrounded by the most powerful sound in the world, the silence of a man who refused to be disrupted. The echo of Musk's footsteps on ancient stone fades gradually as he makes his way back across the forecourt, each step sounding somehow smaller than the last, like periods at the end of a sentence that's already been finished. His team trails behind him at a respectful distance, eyes carefully averted from the crowd. Even his security detail looks subdued, no longer part of a grand performance, but simply facilitating a quiet exit. The atmosphere is extraordinary. Nobody applauds, nobody jeers, but nobody turns away either. It's the kind of profound quiet that doesn't need stage directions or explanation. It holds its own weight, like the pause between lightning and thunder. Behind them, Lance Sergeant McAllister has resumed his perfect stillness, rifle at precisely the regulation angle, eyes fixed on that distant point that guards are trained to focus on. To anyone arriving now, he might appear to have been standing exactly like this all morning, untouched by drama, unbothered by spectacle. But everyone present knows better. They've witnessed something that can't be captured in a viral video or a trending hashtag. As Musk passes the front ranks of tourists, he doesn't acknowledge them. No nods, no waves, no final attempts at connection. Maybe he understands that such gestures wouldn't be returned. Maybe he's finally grasped that this crowd has found something more compelling to focus on. Some of the onlookers still stand with their hands raised in impromptu salutes. Others simply maintain straight backs and solemn faces, as if they've become part of something ceremonial themselves. No one is filming anymore. The phones have been lowered or turned off entirely. Whatever this moment has become, it's too significant for casual documentation. They're not recording, they're participating. Musk reaches the palace entrance. His aide holds the door with practiced efficiency, but Musk pauses before entering. He turns back just once for just a moment. The entire forecourt remains frozen in that quiet tribute. Faces turned not toward him, but toward the figure in scarlet who taught them something about strength without words. He takes one final look at McAllister. The guard hasn't moved, not for the spectacle, not for the silence, not for the cameras, or the crowd, or the richest man on earth. And that immobility, that absolute refusal to be anything other than what duty requires, might be what unsettles Musk most of all. He disappears through the doorway without another word. The door closes with a soft, final thud. But in the forecourt, nothing changes. The tourists remain where they are. The silence holds. Some people have tears in their eyes, though they might not be able to explain exactly why. Others are simply quiet, processing something they've never quite experienced before. The changing of the guard ceremony continues its precise choreography somewhere else in the palace complex. Heavy drums beat their measured rhythm. Pristine boots march in perfect unison. The flowing river of scarlet and steel moves forward with centuries of tradition behind every step. McAllister maintains his post until his exact moment arrives. And when it does, he marches off with the same flawless precision, no acknowledgement of what transpired, no glances toward the crowd, no suggestion that anything unusual occurred. He simply executes his duty and disappears beneath the palace archway, leaving behind a forecourt full of people who will never quite look at strength the same way again. As he vanishes from view, the spectators don't cheer or celebrate. They don't need dramatic gestures or grand finales. They just stand. And in that standing, they've learned something profound about the difference between demanding attention and earning respect. A teenage girl near the front whispers to her companion, "He only said one line." An American businessman murmurs, "That's the first time I've ever seen Musk lose an argument." His wife replies quietly, "No, that's the first time I've seen him realize he was never really part of the conversation." And then, as if released from a spell, the forecourt slowly begins to breathe again. Phones emerge from pockets. Whispers become conversations. The tourists gradually disperse, but they move differently now, more thoughtfully, more quietly, because not one person who witnessed this encounter will leave Buckingham Palace thinking the same way they did when they arrived. They've seen something that can't be taught in business schools or TED Talks. They've seen what happens when real discipline meets manufactured disruption. They've learnt that the most powerful response to demands isn't always a response at all. They've discovered that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is simply refuse to be moved. So what do you think? When someone demands recognition they haven't earned, should you give it to them anyway? Or should you stand your ground the way Lance Sergeant McAllister did in front of the whole world? And here's maybe the bigger question. In our age of constant disruption and digital noise, is there still power in choosing silence over spectacle? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We genuinely read every single one. And these conversations matter more than you might think. If this moment made you think about respect and discipline in a new way, if it reminded you that some things still can't be bought or hacked or optimized, hit that like button. It honestly helps more than you know. Make sure to subscribe and tap that notification bell so you never miss our daily stories about the incredible men and women who guard these traditions. And if you know someone who could use a reminder about what real authority looks like, someone who thinks influence means making noise until people pay attention, share this video with them. Our next Royal Guard story is already waiting on your screen. Click it now, and we'll see you tomorrow with another moment that proves the same truth over and over again. Real strength doesn't demand recognition. It simply stands. When it does, even the loudest voices in the world discover they have nothing left to say.